Oh, okay. There we go. All right, take it away.
Take it away, Shmee.
Yeah.
Here's Bob. Da, 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 da.
That's your music in the background, right?
Yeah.
We'll have
So I
to
thought-
write a theme song, Bob, like you wrote for me.
Thought that-
I remember.
I thought we'd sort of finish up Luke 15 that we started on last week. Maybe have a little bit of fun trying to discuss some of the difference between how this sort of, you hear this in a U.S. church versus Middle Eastern church. Have a little fun with that. So it's a fairly long section from 15:11 down there to 32. Robin, you willing to read?
All of
Oh,
it? Huh?
Yeah, sure. We all know the story. It should go fast.
Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out as a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods of the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field, and when he came near the house, he heard the music and the dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied. Yep. And your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. The brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, and you kill the fattened calf for him. My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and now is found.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I don't know about your Bible, but in my Bible, right before this section, there's a small title that's not scriptural. It's just simply a title to tell you what comes next. What's it in yours, Robin?
The parable of the lost son.
Parable of the lost son. What does the first phrase of the scripture say?
I mean, there was a man who had 2 sons, that?
Yeah. So why is this the story of the lost son, singular, when the story is actually about 2 of them? And they're both lost.
Yeah.
And they both have a problem. But the title is The Prodigal Son, singular. And when we hear this preached, especially on this side of the water, we kind of don't say very much about the second son. We really are talking about this poor kid who went away, spent the money, came back, and all of that. So I thought we'd just have some fun, just kind of walk through this a little bit of, you know, what in here do we not hear quite as offensively as they would have heard when Jesus told this parable in the Middle East. Remember, this is in a section where he's been challenged about being with sinners, and he tells the story of a lost sheep out of 100, sort of a man's story. He tells the lost coin, 1 out of 10, and it's sort of a woman's story of a house, and it's a small Middle Eastern single room Palestinian home. So these are stories that everybody's going to be able to relate to. And then he says, and this man has 2 sons. And as the story goes on, just in the background, we've got 2 sons. We've got enough wealth to divide it. We're killing fatted calves. We have servants or slaves. The other son says, you didn't even give me a goat, not even a little bit of cabrito for dinner. So the father in this story is a wealthy man in a wealthy family. So it's a different story than the lost sheep or the lost coin. It's a different family. Obviously, the father is supposed to be representative of who?
God.
Yeah, there we go. It's Sunday school. We have to have that answer, right? Exactly. And the 2 sons are sort of, if you will, those of us who are the obedient kind. Get near the end, it's, oh, Father, I've never done anything wrong. I've always been here. I've taken care of you. I've been a good boy, you know, and I'm still hacked off. And the first son was like, yeah, stick it in your ear. I'm leaving this place. So we've got the rebellious first son, and we've got the good son at the back end of the story. But when we think about living in the Middle East, think about living in Egypt, Mahdi, Middle East in general, and of course, obviously, in the time of Christ, there are things in here that don't ring quite the same way that they did with then when he's telling the story. Because if you think about it, he's telling these stories to the crowd to elicit a reaction from the crowd. You know, and anybody who tells jokes, stand-up comedy or this and that, the whole idea is to get the crowd going and get a reaction from the crowd. And Jesus is telling his story for effect. So let's think about the things in here that are, the crowd would go, excuse me? Or, oh yeah, that's cool, kind of thing. So we have a man with 2 sons. The younger says to the father, give me the share of the estate that falls to me. That happens every day. Your kids come in and say, gee, I wish you were dead. Could I have my share of the inheritance so I can go do what I want? That's okay. I don't think it's even okay today. So when the prodigal son, the younger son, says to dad, Dad, you're not dead yet, but I really would like my portion of the estate. Could you give it to me so I can go do something? So the start of the story, the entire audience is going to go, excuse me? Pardon me? Because the standard response is, no. And if he gets up, we're going to hit him again. This is not an appropriate statement for a young son to be giving to his father anytime, let alone in the Middle East at this time.
Isn't it disgrace to the family
Oh,
culturally?
yep. He's disgraced his father. He's disgraced the family. He's disgraced the entire town. Anybody who hears about it, I mean, it doesn't say he's done it in public. So, but everybody in town is going to hear about it. Come on, it is the Middle East.
Everybody in town is gonna know it because he's got to sell land.
I can't hear you, Mary Kay.
That everybody in town is gonna know it because he has to sell land or sheep or something in order to give this kid resources.
Hmm.
So the town is, people in the town are gonna be buying at a discount, probably, whatever it is this man is selling to be able to pay off this kid.
Mm.
The kid not only insults his dad, but then he has to turn everything that he gets into cash because wealth there is animals, land, things like that. And so he divides it up. The kid sells it and runs out of town as quick as he can, as far as we can tell. So Jesus, in telling this, has already got everybody going, the lousy kid. You have got to be kidding me. If it was my kid, I'd fill in the blank. And yet it says the father gave him his request, let him sell the land, and let him leave town. Now he's embarrassed himself. He's embarrassed the families. You know, it's all bad. So he goes to a distant country, and there he squanders his estate with loose living. My book says loose living. When I look up the words for that, it basically is wastefully. He's not managing his money well. It's sort of like, wow, I've got all this money. How could I ever spend it all? It's like 85 or 90% of people who win a reasonable lottery are broke in 5 years because it's more money than they've ever seen. And it's like, well, there's no way I could spend it all. Not realizing you can spend it all really quick if you aren't watching what you're doing. And so what it says here, as far as when I look up the words, is he doesn't manage his money at all. He's got lots of friends and he spends all the money. And it doesn't take too long. And so now the crowd's like, well, it serves him right. Kid took dad's money. He said, I wish you were dead. He sold the family property, moved out of town. Now he's broke. That serves a kid right. So then a famine occurs. He begins to be impoverished. I think that a good way to say that, he's broke. And he hires himself out and he starts feeding pigs. Now think about the reaction of the crowd when Jesus says, so because Jesus is telling a parable, he's making up a story. This isn't, well, my friend Ahmed over there had a son who, that isn't how this is. He's trying to create a picture. And so the poor kid now, good Jewish kid, is feeding pigs. And whatever he's feeding the pigs looks better than what he's getting to eat, which isn't much. He's awfully hungry. So in verse 17, he comes to his senses and he says, how many of my father's hired men have more than enough bread to eat, and I'm dying of hunger? So he says, I'm hungry. Even my servants, even my dad's servants do better than I am doing. So I'm going to go to my father and I'm going to say, Father, I've sinned against heaven and in your sight. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men. What's he expressing there? What's the solution to his problem?
Become a servant.
Become a servant. And what's the whole purpose to becoming a servant?
To get fed.
There's one. He's hungry. What's the other?
I mean, he's humbling himself.
He is in one sense. But he's also looking at it as a way to earn his way back in. Right?
Right, to work for it.
I've made a big enough mistake that, Dad, if you just have me, I'll work off my debt. So his perspective is he's going to become, instead of a son, he's going to become a servant. And by working off the debt, he'll be able to earn his way back into sonship, hopefully someday. Now think about who's telling the story and what he's been trying to teach us for 2,000 years about grace versus earn your way into heaven. The son has the standard human response of, I've got to earn my way back in. I'm not a son, I'm a slave, I'm a servant. But the crowd's going to go, the kid's got it right. You know, the kid deserves to be hit upside the head. Nope, shouldn't be welcome in the family house. Become a servant, that's fine if he's hungry. I don't know how many years he's going to have to work, but he's going to have to work a while to earn his way back in there. And maybe someday he might come back to dad, and dad would finally say, yeah, it seems like you paid your way back in. Okay, we've kept your bedroom for you. But so far the crowd's kind of with him. They're, you know, pretty shocked at how the story is going, but they're kind of with him on how the younger son has to go. So he gets up and he goes to his father, but while he's still a long way off, his father saw him, felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. Now, what's the odd thing in there from a Middle Eastern perspective?
Running.
No joke. Dads don't run. Boys run. Like we've talked about with Zacchaeus and climbing trees. Dads don't climb trees. This one does, but generically, dads don't climb trees. Dads don't run. And if you think about Galileas, right, guys? You're wearing a choir robe. I mean, you ladies wear things that kind of are dresses and stuff, so you understand this thing. But for dad to run, dad's got to get a hold of the front of his Galilea and stick it in his teeth or hang on to it so he can run and not fall flat on his face. And as we all know, a very important high status person like this in the town, would he ever run?
No.
Now, he doesn't hurry to anything. People follow him at a stately
him.
pace. So if he's running through town, he sees his kid coming, he's running through town, everybody's looking like, what the heck? So now everybody's really like, okay, the father gave the kid the estate and let him sell it. I mean, that's totally completely crazy. But now the father's running to get to the kid before the rest of the town does. Because the rest of the town hasn't forgotten what's going on. The rest of the town is going to berate the kid, make fun of the kid. You know, he doesn't stand a chance coming in the front gate. And so dad's going to protect the son and to embrace the son. And he's making a fool of himself to do it. And everybody who hears the story is like, he did what? This kid doesn't deserve this. Why is dad not only let him do it in the first place, but now he's running? The kid hasn't come back, and the kid's speech was, we were okay with this when the kid's speech was, make me a servant, I can't live in the house, I hope I can earn my way back in someday. Everybody's okay with that part of the story, but when dad runs, they're all aghast, like, what's this guy doing? And why is he accepting the kid in? But what he's showing them, obviously, because if you go back to the beginning of Luke 15, they're criticizing Jesus for receiving sinners. And we talked about the receiving, the basically leaning into, the basically going forward, looking forward to, looking for opportunities to include and to draw in. So he's trying to paint a picture of heaven because in each of these stories, in the first two, he said, so heaven is like this. There is more joy over one sinner than over the 99 righteous. So Jesus is trying to paint a different picture. So dad runs. The kid tries okay, I'm no longer worthy of heaven. I'm no longer be your son. He doesn't get to the part about, can you make me a servant? He doesn't get to that part. Dad interrupts him and says, no. Bring out the robe, bring out a ring, get him some sandals, get the fattened calf. We're going to have a celebration. My son was dead. He was lost. We got to celebrate. So we're going to have a party. So this is really kind of surprising. Dad's being awfully graceful and compassionate and kind. And it's not what the normal father would do. It's also, if you think about it in a pictorial sense, it's not how the Pharisees and the scribes treat Jews that sort of aren't in good standing, if you will, right? Very quick to say somebody is unclean, or you've got to go wash, or you've got to repent, or in order to be made whole in the synagogue, you've got to figure out what you've done wrong. You then have to repent and repay. And after you've done all of that, then maybe, you've gone through all that routine, maybe, but just maybe you can be accepted back in. And this is obviously totally and completely the opposite of that. So now we get the older son, because the story is about two sons, not just the one. He comes in from the field. Well, okay. We already talked about the fact that this is a fairly well-to-do family. This son hasn't been out in the field with a shovel. He hasn't been, cleaning up the sheep. He's not sweeping out the barn. The son's out supervising. This is the first son of the father who has a fairly reasonable amount of wealth. This kid is not really dirty and sweaty, and he's been sitting under a tree probably, not digging in the fields. So he comes in, he hears the noise, he approaches the house, he hears the party going on. He talks to one of the servants or young people that are there and says, "What's the party all about?" He says, "Well, your brother came home. So your father has killed the calf. You received him safe and sound." And he says he became angry and wasn't willing to go in. So now we get the second son, the older son, who's been there all the time, is standing outside. Everybody else is in the party. He's standing outside and he's like, "No, not that brother." He embarrassed us in front of the town. He's made Dad mad. He made me mad. There's no way I'm going into this party. Now, go back to the Middle East. What should Dad do to the recalcitrant son who's standing outside like this?
I'll condemn him as well because of his disrespect.
Yeah. And guess what? The younger son did it in private when he asked for his inheritance. He wasn't in the middle of the town square. This son's in the middle of a party. Yeah, they should be helping to host. And everybody's standing around, and he's standing out outside with his hands folded, and absolutely everybody can see that he's expressing his attitude. So he's publicly shaming his father. His father should not be going out. There's no way his father should be going anywhere. But his father goes out and pleads with him. And he says, "Look, for many years I've been serving you. I've never neglected a command. You've never given me a goat so that I might celebrate with my friends, which doesn't include you or my other brother." I added that part. "And your son has devoured your wealth with prostitutes." There's nothing in the beginning of the story that says everything about prostitutes. Absolutely nothing. It says he wasted his money, spent it unwisely, wasn't very good at budgeting. It wasn't a Gentile town. It says absolutely nothing about ladies of the evening. Absolutely nothing. That's the older son's fabrication. Well, I'm sure that's what he was doing. Well, that's what I'd be doing. I mean, if I did that. He's like the people in church who've been in church since they were born, and somebody gets saved out of a lifestyle that's rather questionable, and they're like, "Well, that's not really, they're getting forgiven in the 11th hour and they get to go to heaven. I didn't have any fun. They were out there having fun for 50 years. I stayed here, didn't have any fun at all. I was just in church." And I mean, that's what this brother's saying. "I stayed here as a servant. I've served you for all these years. You've never given me anything. Who's it all belong to? Who's it belong to really? It belongs to him. Once the inheritance went to son number one, everything that's left belongs to son number two, aside from whatever they eat or drink between now and when dad dies. But he's complaining about, I didn't get any cabrito, you know, to have dinner with my friends, and you killed this fatted calf for my brother, and he's been in all these places with these ladies of the evening, which isn't part of the story. And so the father looks at him and says, son, everything I have is yours. You've always been here, but we have to celebrate because your brother of yours was dead. He's come back to life. He's lost and he's been found. That's the end of chapter 15. What's missing?
Well, we don't find out what happened.
Yeah, there's no ending. We know the younger son came home. We know we're having a party. We don't know how the older son responds. And in telling the story like this, Jesus basically is looking at the Pharisees that are standing there going, so what's your answer, older son? Which one is the picture of the Pharisees and the scribes? The older son. I've never done anything wrong. I've been a good boy. I follow the law. I've been doing everything I'm supposed to do. All these other people. And Jesus is like, yeah, I understand. But there's more celebration in heaven for one that is saved than for 99 that don't need to be saved. And so the story's not finished because he's basically turned into the Pharisees and the scribes and going, so how's the story finish for you? What are you going to do? And he does it by telling a story. The 99 sheep isn't a shocking story. The lady with the lost coin isn't a shocking story. But he tells a story of the prodigal son, and everybody's kind of like, excuse me? And then he basically looks at him and says, yeah, and you're the second son. Come on. What are you going to do, guys? And so then it becomes the same for us. Where do we identify, not necessarily in our entire lives, but in our attitudes and how we do things? And are we going to not only do what we think the Lord wants us to do, but how are we going to treat the prodigal son who comes home? Because I've actually been in conversations where somebody says something like, and you know, this isn't exactly what it is. Something like, well, if I find out that Hitler repented, 10 minutes before he died, and he's in heaven, then I don't want to go. I mean, that's it. I'm not, if he's up there, I don't want to be there. Well, obviously none of us know where he is. However, what would God's heart be? God's heart really would be, he would want him to repent and be there. He doesn't want anybody to perish. We don't have that same attitude. The middle of the story, a lot of us would be cheering whether, yeah, that's what the kid deserves. Yeah, I hope he's hungry. He wasted all his money, the idiot. And if he's coming home, he's sleeping in the garage and he's going to be mowing the lawn until he pays back everything. We don't see any problem with any of that. But that's not what the Father did. And obviously the Father is God or Christ in this thing. And the older brother is our friendly neighborhood Pharisees and scribes. What's that? Well, or, some of us or all of us are, well, I don't know about you, but maybe. What we need to tease out of it is sort of, it is a story about two brothers. It is a story about how are we going to treat the ones who wander away and come back. It is about what is the heart of God in relation to people in general. And then how can we show that in our lives? Are we prodigal has come home, we must celebrate? Or, well, okay, you may have repented, but he's got some cleaning up to do. He needs a bath and needs to do a few other things, and he probably needs to do some chores and show that he's sorry. And maybe then we'll have a party. We're not going to have the party today. Let's hold off and see whether it actually works, whether it kind of holds, whether he's really sorry. I'm smiling. I'm worried.
I'm thinking. No,
Uh-oh.
I just,
No,
I
I'm
love
really-
that. No, I love this story because the part that hits me the most is at the end there when the father says, I've always been there with you. And it's always hit me because I've been a Christian, I mean, my whole life pretty much. And I cannot imagine living this world without having God there. And I mean, that'd be awful. I think about it. What if, you did learn to know Christ on your deathbed, but then you would have missed out on all those years just having God there and just walking this journey with you. And I don't know. I don't know why that has always hit me the most is like, I've always been with you and you've always had me. But I love that. It's just a good reminder for me. The other thing I was thinking about when you were talking about the party is that it's kind of neat that the dad throws the party, and it's kind of I think it's a good way that he's protecting his younger son. He's showing his community like, hey, I'm accepting this kid. You need to too. You are, if I can let him in, this is my example. I'm great with him. I'm cool with him. You need to be too. And I think that's I thought about that a little bit while you were talking about it. And I thought that was kind of another layer of the way God is, that he protects us and he thinks about all the details. He didn't have to throw a party. He could have just welcomed in and, you're my son and here's a nice ring and here's a nice robe. And now you're my son again. And it could have just kept internal, but he didn't. He publicly accepted his son. And by doing that, he's, he made known that his son is truly his son, number one, and number two, told everybody else this is the way you should treat him too. So I thought about that too. So just thinking.
Things I think is interesting about the older brother, he says, you never gave me a party. You never did this. You never did that. But did he ask? And do we ask? There's so much available to us. There are so many gifts out there. There's so many resources that we have because we are his children. But do we avail ourselves of them? And had the kid, did the kid ever ask him, gee, could I have this? Could I do that? Instead he's, thinking of himself as a hired hand, and he's missed the heart of the father.
I think there's sorry.
I think what maybe reminded me, but there's, like you were saying before, Bob, the parable of the lost son. Well, it could be either of the sons that are lost, right? But in different ways. And I don't think I've ever really thought of it as the eldest son being the lost one. But seriously, I think, like Pam, you were saying, being a Christian all your life or whatever, we kind of lose focus on all that we do have and all that is available for us. And forget that, our Father has never left us, not one single step that we've taken, right? And I think when things go awry or things don't go right, or we think that's not fair, that we make ourselves the victim of that when that's not how we should view it. So, I don't think I've ever really looked at it both ways, of both sons being lost. So.
It's interesting, having just read the Iliad and the Odyssey. And in the Odyssey, we have, I listened to an audiobook. I didn't read it, but long. But the Odyssey is, in that story, you have a lot of moments where this wealthy household is feeding lots of people. And every day, the way that works is you bring in some sheep or some goats or whatever, you kill them, you get the fire set, you make the meal, everybody sits around and eats. And this time, having just heard that story, when the son says, "You never even gave me a goat," I'm sitting here going, every day there have been animals killed so that you can eat. Like, you've been sitting at a rich table where every single day something is brought in and slaughtered so that the community eats. And I'm going, what does he even mean by, you've never even given me a goat? It's like, are you saying, anyway, it's just really interesting to me because they were wealthy and they did eat. And it seems that he was definitely being petty and then thinking about us, right? And what is it that we ask for or say, well, God, you're not doing this? And what do we overlook that's going on, I'm just thinking about a conversation my mom and Tammy were having recently, where Tammy was talking about that she wanted to be doing all these fun things while mom was gone. And she had been over the last few days saying, well, she had gone fishing with somebody and she had gone to this other event and she had gone to this church thing. Anyway, she had done these things, but she was feeling frustrated, sick, unhappy for, whatever. And so she was like, I haven't got to do anything fun. And mom was like, well, you said you got to do this and this and this. And she was like, well, when you put it that way, yeah, I guess I did, But how often are we doing that with the Lord, right? When we get overwhelmed by the moment, we're like, but God, I asked you to do this thing and you haven't done it, and you're never there for me, and I never get, and then, and yet to open our eyes and see everything around us. Anyway, it just struck me as so petty after hearing about how they ate.
Well, I think to Robin's point, in the same way, it almost highlights there's two types of sinners. Those that are the lawbreakers and those that are the law keepers. Because in the lawbreakers, we understand, and in the law keepers, there's no grace. And without grace, you're still a sinner.
It's like, even though you're a believer, you're not right, or you're not sinless. You know what I mean? I mean, we all have our issues too, but sometimes it's harder for us to see it and to swallow it when we realize it's there, to identify it.
Why don't you stop recording?
Okay.